Eric Mugendi, welcome to the African Tech Roundup, bro.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Somewhat fresh on a new role. Tell us about it.
So I'm the managing editor of a fact-checking initiative called PesaCheck. So what we do is we look into public statements about how taxpayer money is being spent in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. That's where we are at the moment. So it's a Code for Africa initiative. And yes, I'm the guy who goes through the stories before they're published and makes sure that they all make sense.
You're on the mic a day before, Kenya goes to the polls to pick their brand new president. And I picked the day intentionally because by the time everyone's hearing this, we'll know who won, and there'll probably be a dozen or so think pieces about why they won and how they won. And everyone's going to be some kind of an expert about the role of fake news in ensuring so-and-so made it to the White House or whatever house Kenyan presidents tend to inhabit when they're in power.
It's the house on the
hill. So I mean, I wanted us to be, I didn't want us to be weighed down. I didn't want the conversation to be weighed down by all that sort of pop analysis that's bound to come out of this situation. And I feel like you're perfectly placed, not just because of your brand new role, but also just how deeply embedded you are in Kenyan political culture and the tech culture, but also because of an article I know you wrote, and I know so these things are close to your heart at the moment. You wrote an article, a recent article was it in the Star, the Kenyan Star, that talked about how tech might be used to nip fake news in the bud. Now that got me thinking that Eric might be onto some things that I don't know about, one, how serious this issue is, relative to what we saw happen in America leading up to Trump's ascension. One, how serious it is, and two, just how ready or not Kenya might be to see this thing affect their election.
Yeah, so the article was actually a follow-up to an event that we'd had on, it's called Hacks Hackers. So what we were doing was we were talking about technology and how, first of all, how it's contributed to the spread of fake news, and then secondly, how we can use tech to solve the problem. Because we were looking at it from a distribution perspective. A lot of the fake news that gets around now isn't through things like newspapers and traditional media per se. It's online, because you find that you get a link to a story and then you're like, this is something like completely preposterous. It doesn't make any sense, but it does confirm something I've always suspected about a particular topic. So what I'll do is I will share it in a group, or share it on Twitter or Facebook, or post it on WhatsApp, and it's going to go to other like-minded individuals who are going to spread it further. So you find that there's a lot of all these really interesting, really weird stories that target a particular aspect of the political process, be it the candidates, or how the poll is going to be run, or how people are supposed to conduct themselves after the polls. And it just got us thinking that some of the things that we're seeing in terms of fake news tend to be very, there's telltale signs that you can actually see before you actually share some of these stories. So where tech comes in the stopping this from happening is there's been a number of initiatives. There's been, I think it was Facebook who posted a number of guidelines, because I think they're starting to acknowledge the role that they've played in the spread of this news. So they're like, let's go put a sticky banner on the Facebook homepage. Every time you log in, you're going to see how to tell that a story is fake. And then there's also things like Google reverse image search, where if a story comes with an image, you can actually search and find whether that image is legit or not. And then other things like basically how to report some of these fake stories, and then somehow someone at the end of the distribution medium, now on the other side, will actually see that this has been flagged as fake news and that it's going to be taken down.
So a couple of things come out of what you're saying. One of them that stands out is how you describe the actual content itself as being weird and, quote, interesting, you said. Presumably there's a lot of creative effort going into the stuff. And recently in the Mail and Guardian, the South African Mail and Guardian, they interviewed a Zimbabwean journalist who's actually making a fairly comfortable living peddling fake news on various sites that he's created. He, of course, remained anonymous and that kind of thing. He maintains that he uses the pretty lucrative amounts of money he makes from the sites he maintains to actually fund his real journalism, his real activism on on sort of on platforms that we've all come to trust, and uses the money he makes sort of peddling dumb stories about celebrities and fake this and fake that in order to do this. In fact, his wife, he claimed in the article, feels that he should just give up with the real news altogether because, one, it puts him in such danger because he takes on government and other things, and two, it just doesn't make the family any money. And so I suppose the question I'm asking you is, within the context of the Kenyan problem with this issue, who do you think is doing it and why?
So there were actually two videos that came up, I think it was about a week and a half ago. There was one that was purporting to be from CNN and another one that was purporting to be from the BBC. And you could see this is someone who actually got they had a look at the site and how they present their content, and then they literally copied the visuals and the graphics and even the scroller, the ticker at the bottom of the screen. And they were trying to make it look like these were stories covering, and then there were stories about how well the president was doing versus his main opponent. And then you could tell, I mean, if you watched a lot of CNN and BBC, you could tell the content was a bit off. But if you look at the branding and the amount of effort that went into producing these stories, like if you were just some casual observer, you could actually it could trick you. And you'd be like, this is the stuff that the news media is saying about Kenya. And then it's videos like those are really hard to pin down because, for one, if you look at the way they're distributed, actually received that video several times in several different WhatsApp groups. And then no one is saying where they got it from. They're just saying it's just forwarded as received, which is something that keeps coming up over and over again when it comes to these fake news stories. It's just, I got it and then it appealed to my sensibilities in one way or another, and then I just felt the urge to share it to other people. So no one really admits to actually producing this content. And then there was another video that was particularly disturbing that was looking at how the future of Kenya would look like if Raila Odinga was elected as president. And then it was bleak.
Oh, I saw that. I actually saw that one.
Yeah.
It made its way here.
It was really bad. And then you could tell, but I think the common theme among these videos is you can see it's favoring one particular candidate. So one is likely to draw conclusions that the people producing it are the ones likely to be more on the president's side. And I think that's a trap that we're likely to fall into once we start taking these things apart, because it'd be like, if you look at the person most likely to benefit, I think there's a rule whose name I can't really remember. If you want to understand something, you just need to look at who it benefits the most.
Except we have precedents set in the US where using that sort of reasoning can also be quite tricky, given how there are at any given time many sort of parties who stand to benefit from various different scenarios. I mean, us trying to figure out who's on whose side. If you think of WikiLeaks and how, on one hand, they claim to have the planet's best interests at heart, and I think the vast majority of sort of pro-net neutrality activists might wholeheartedly back WikiLeaks straight into a fire if need be. But then Hillary Clinton claiming that they're just this irresponsible mess. Trump. It's getting really complicated to sort of draw a straight line from a piece of a piece of content like you described,
Yeah.
and who might stand to benefit from it. And then perhaps that's even the danger in trying to make conclusions about who might be behind it.
Because one of the things that has kept popping up is that you find there's this firm, Cambridge Analytica, that keeps getting linked with the Kenyan election. Because if you look at the sort of tactics they deploy, because they've been linked with the Brexit vote and then how Trump came to win the election by basically just deploying some strategic ads and like targeting voters and doing profiles and identifying people based on their potential voting patterns. Because it got to a point where there was a maize shortage I think it was sometime last month or it was sometime in June. And if you actually went to Google and then you searched for maize, you'd get an ad that's promoting that's saying that the president cares for us so much, he's actually gone to buy maize and then he's brought it to Kenya so that you can get your ugali, which is like our version of pap. So basically, if you follow the chain of how these things are happening, you can see that there's a very deliberate effort to actually latch onto like certain keywords every time you do like a Google search or every time you try to post some like a bit of content on Facebook or like you try to start a conversation on Twitter and then you see like certain people replying and then you can tell that there's a deliberate effort to try to direct the conversation in a certain way. So it's hard. Like I think the biggest difference between the politics in the States and over here is that over there it's a lot more clear cut. Like you can tell, for example, where a candidate's interests lie. But over here, what we get is the government and the opposition tend to have very similar interests in terms of like who their funders are, where their strategic interests lie.
Right.
So you can't really pin it down in terms of who's likely to benefit more from whoever's getting elected, unless now they appeal to like an individual's sensibilities in terms of like this is my person, this is how I'm going to vote because I feel that he represents my interests. But end of the day, I think what we keep getting is the same, like the person at the top might change, but the people who are like the behind the scenes financing everything, all the tenders, getting all the money, they're all the same.
In the case of America, Republican Democrats certainly don't share funders. When you think of even the South African situation where, the main opposition in the Democratic Alliance versus, say, the ruling party, the ANC, definitely, there's not going to be an overlap in terms of donor funding or special interests that back one or the other. Perhaps some, but not much, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And in Kenya, that's not the case.
Yeah, because I think the thing that keeps happening here is that you find that there's shadowy cartels that keep getting mentioned every once in a while. Like one candidate will accuse the other of being backed by cartels. Every time there's talk of someone getting funding from some dubious source or from like benefiting from corruption, they keep mentioning cartels. They don't mention people by name because it's all interlinked. It's all really shadowy. Because if you start like trying to understand what sort of money and what sort of funding is actually going into the political process, because much as we want to hope that these people are doing this because out of the kindness of their hearts and because they love us so much, we know that they're doing it because they're going to get like their own strategic interests served. So by linking all of these things and then by using a lot of the tools that we have online to try to drive the conversations in certain ways, they're trying to benefit from the sort of reach that social media and all these other technologies are giving them in order to leverage their positions and then try to appeal to not really the people who are already in their camps, but there's a lot of undecided people as well, undecided voters online who are like they genuinely have no idea who they're going to vote for. So by using all these tools, by basically just checking your Facebook to see what you've liked and what sort of content you've shared, and then trying to figure out how old you are, what your gender is, what your job is, how much money you make, they're able to basically just stratify the whole thing, and then they tailor an ad to speak to you.
And so, I mean, is it at the point where it's too close to call? I mean, on the other side of the coin, right there in East Africa, you've got Rwanda with like, I don't even know if you call that an election with the sort of win that the incumbent had. It's also been interesting to observe the role of the internet and online media in either promoting the incumbent's rule or like outright sort of questioning his integrity, and interesting to see how detractors hardly made a dent, it seems, and to see sort of Kenya going through this. I mean, do you think it says something about the maturity of Kenya's democracy relative to, say, Rwanda?
I think what it shows is there's a lot more in this election to fight for, because like Rwanda has been like on that steady trajectory where like literally everything you hear from there is basically all they do is win. But there's also been like some.
Sorry, I just heard the actual rap song in my head when you said that.
And DJ Khaled in the background.
Yeah, Khaled just dropping a quick beat. Anyway, yeah.
So basically, the value proposition for Kagame is different from, say, Uhuru and Raila, because for Kagame, he's like, I literally took this country from like almost like the ashes, and then I built it into one of Africa's like leading investment destinations and all that other stuff. So for him, it's like, in order for me to perpetuate this, you need to vote for me. And then because of that, like people recognize that, versus someone else who's like coming in as an outsider, trying to break into the stranglehold that Kagame has on the country. It's hard for someone to come in like that. But if you look at Kenya, one of the biggest issues in this election cycle has been corruption, because there's been like there's a perceived inability by the president to actually fight corruption. And one of the things that he actually did was he literally went on national TV and literally asked, like, so what do you want me to do? And we're like, you can't really say something like that. And you're the president. You're the person who's supposed to be like telling us what's being done in order to fight these people. So one of the things that keeps happening is that you find each side tries to paint the other side as being more corrupt. So corruption is a really big issue. And then another issue is there's been like lots of problems in service delivery, especially by doctors and nurses. Like there's an ongoing nurses strike, which I don't think was really tackled during this election cycle. But the fact that there's all these public servants who are saying we are not making enough money for our positions, and as a result we're going to go on strike, there's a lot of issues that haven't really been addressed. But I think one of the things that has been happening is you find that there's a lot of ads that keep popping up of the president talking about his accomplishments and the accomplishments of his government. But I don't see them because I have ad block on YouTube. So a lot of these things just pass me by. But I was actually discussing this with a couple of friends of mine. They were telling me that every time they go online, there's this one particular video that keeps playing of the president literally the theme song is Uhuru ni wetu, which is Uhuru is ours.
Right.
And they're trying to propagate this sense of ownership. And then you see the same ads like also feature on mainstream media, because they actually did something very tactical, the government. What they did was they decided to cut the amount of advertising they were doing in the mainstream media. And then on the other hand, they were coming in with all these political ads, and they were like, if you're going to run this, because media houses have been struggling to make revenue, so they were like, if you run these ads, we're just going to give you money. Like it's basically they are cutting off one revenue stream and then presenting another one. And for the media house that's struggling to make bank, that looks like a really good proposition. If you compare, say, Kenya with I think there was an election in Uganda last year. And if you compare how like the incumbent has been received in Kenya versus in Uganda or in Rwanda, where like both Kagame and Museveni won by really big margins, there's some jitters on the side of the president. So it's a bit fuzzy. So 'cause, like the last opinion polls came out about a week. Yeah, it was beginning of last week because the deadline is 7 days to the election. So
And how reliable typically are polls in Kenya?
they're quite reliable, I would say, because they try to be as representative as possible. Although, like the two main opinion pollsters actually came out with two different results, but the same conclusion. The conclusion was that there was going to be, most likely there's going to be a runoff between Uhuru and Raila. And there was one info track that actually put Raila slightly ahead. And there was another, which is Ipsos, that put the president like slightly ahead. But both of them didn't make the 50% plus one vote threshold, according to both of the opinion polls. So I think they have some credibility. I mean, there's been accusations of bias because there's literally been a lot of like fake news surrounding like who exactly owns or who has shares in some of these polling companies. And even there was a presidential debate and then the president failed to show up. And then immediately after that, there was like even more fake news where there was a fake letter of incorporation of the company that was tasked with running the debate.
Wow.
And they were saying that one of the people who was in charge, like one of the directors of the company, is actually the communications guy in the main opposition party. As in, there's a lot of like different angles that they're taking in terms of actually putting this stuff online. Because as late as I think it was yesterday, there was a fake memo that was going around saying that if your ballot isn't stamped, it'll still be considered valid. And then there was another memo that came out after that saying that whatever that memo was saying was a lie. And then to make it worse, the website of the Electoral Commission was offline, so you couldn't go to verify which of these documents was actually legit.
Oh no!
You can see the angle of approach keeps changing. So instead of now directly attacking the candidates, what they're trying to do is they're latching onto a narrative that's already there, because the thing with the stamped ballots was actually linked to the fact that the Electoral Commission actually has printed extra ballots in case like you get someone marks a ballot wrongly and then it has to be destroyed. So you get another paper before you cast it. So what they were saying was that what this new angle made it look like was that there were probably going to be like it was going to be the likelihood of ballot stuffing, where you have all these ballots that aren't stamped but they're marked, so it looks like these are legit votes. So the commission came out afterwards and they said that only the ballots that have been marked, have been stamped, are going to be considered valid. So it's a lot of like it's a very confusing cycle on the whole, because there's always new angles of approach for every aspect of the election, like from the candidates to the process to the people who are conducting it, the Electoral Commission. And then, because it came out yesterday and said that literally 1 in 4 polling stations is in an area that doesn't have network coverage. And then this is stuff they knew since January. So it was 11,000 out of about 40-odd thousand polling stations are in places that have like 0 3G coverage. So the people who will actually collect the results will actually have to go somewhere. Like once you have the completed tally of all the 6 positions, you go to a place with network coverage so that you can transmit the results to now the Electoral Commission headquarters. So it's just been like there's been so much information and so much noise around all these different aspects of the election. And then literally at every stage, there's like a fake story, or there's a fake video, or there's a fake bit of information. So yeah, like now the work of countering all this becomes impossible.
The other thing that that we all should be humble to, surely, is that while Kenya is far ahead much of the rest of, say, East Africa in terms of like mobile adoption and internet adoption, a big chunk of the population isn't directly affected by some of these things, surely? Or am I wrong to say that?
No, you're right. Because like a lot of the fake news that most people have encountered.
Sounds quite sophisticated, and not that I'm saying, say, a rural Kenyan with no smartphone is not sophisticated. I just mean it does appear to be targeted at a fairly well-informed, perhaps well-connected individual, which I imagine isn't representative of the average Kenyan.
I think the fact that a lot of people have smartphones, a lot of people have mobile phones, it lends itself to now the spread of this information, because you'd have to literally have a working knowledge of, say, what the URL of the BBC is, or what like the normal CNN landing page looks like, or other things like those, in order to know that, for example, the link that you're getting that says something about some politician is actually true. One of the things that's been shared around in terms of like literal fake news has been a picture of a politician. Like, this was during the party primaries. He was holding a newspaper that had a fake headline that said that he had defected to now the ruling party, because he was in opposition. He was running in the opposition, and then the headline actually said that he's defected to the ruling party, and it has a picture of him, and it has like the masthead and all those other things. And then it was just scattered like everywhere. Though people actually printed these things and then scattered them around.
Wow. If anything, there's some people who are being introduced to quote unquote the BBC for the first time as fake news.
Yeah, I get what you mean, yeah.
They probably know of the BBC, they've heard it on radio and that kind of thing, but they don't habitually consume BBC news, perhaps on television, reinforced by, the clipping shared by someone they know and perhaps trust. They're receiving a quote-unquote BBC clip that's totally manufactured. That's actually quite a scary thought.
Also, another thing is that in the run-up to this election, there were 2 different reports that were published looking at fake news and how it spread. Then it actually showed that people have a lot of trust in the radio, and people also have some trust in the stuff that they read online, especially if it's on like legitimate news sites where it's like the main newspapers and the main newspapers actually. Because I think one of the things that was trusted the least was community leaders for some reason. There was also word on the street, like just gossip basically. From that study, they showed that something like 9 out of 10 Kenyans actually had been exposed to fake news to do with the election. And then the other report was actually looking at how people actually share the fake news stories that they get. So they did an analysis of like really partisan groups, like groups that were like skewed in like either pro-government or pro-opposition. And then they showed that the more fake news stories were shared on pro-opposition sites. And it was actually a really interesting conclusion, because you can see that these are people who are more likely to believe something because it's not really coming from an official source. Like, it doesn't have official named or something like that. So the first reaction to getting any news that would be supportive of their cause would be to share it, instead of now questioning it, as like I think most pro-government groups are doing. And then the fact that a lot of these groups, a lot of this sharing is done on dark social, on Telegram, on WhatsApp, on things that you can't really track. It means that there's a lot of the circulation that's going on that you can't really know unless you ask someone like face to face, like or if you happen to be in one of those groups and then you get a link like that. So there's a lot of conversations that are happening around this election, including like people being urged to just go out and vote and all these other things. So in this really big conveyor belt of information, it's really easy to slip in like a couple of fake stories, and then there's just going to be carried on and on and on. Because in the end, it's not really a conversation per se, because you can't really ask the person sending you this stuff if they actually verified if it's true. They just know they got it from someone who got it from someone who got it from someone who definitely knows something.
And listen, I mean, many people, myself included, assume that the big story, in terms of the role of media, influencing this election we thought, at least I thought, the big story would be the government sort of restricting access to the internet, cutting off social media, things that they might still very well do tomorrow. By the time this plays out, we will know for sure whether the government decided to try and keep its citizens safe, quote unquote, by restricting access to social media and the like. But at this stage, I'd imagine that even those with the power to do that are realizing that that's probably not where the make or break's going to be.
Yeah, because I think the fact that the Communications Authority has come out several times to say the internet will not be shut down, there's still a bit of doubt, because I think during the voting process, people will still be able to get online tomorrow during election day. But it's what happens in the aftermath, because they keep saying that we'll keep the internet on unless things just go to the dogs, which could very well happen. I'm sure that the internet will be on tomorrow during election day, but in the aftermath of all the votes have been cast, now we need to start tallying and we need to figure out who's won which seat. I think that's where we're going to see some element of interception, or at the worst case scenario, if there is a shutdown, it's going to end really badly, I think, because the thing is, the shutdowns tend to lend themselves to information vacuums. If you have a situation where you don't really know what's happening and you're trying to, because literally now, if I want to find out what's happening anywhere, I just get on my phone and get online, try to see what people are talking about on social media, try to discuss some of these things if it's in WhatsApp groups. So the moment my access to that is shut down, my first thought is something sinister is happening. And then you link that to the fact that there's all this talk of polling stations not really having access to the internet, because what happened in 2013 was the whole voter identification system using biometrics actually failed. It wasn't, it literally just worked for a couple of hours at the beginning of election day, and then it just completely collapsed. So yes, there might be all this technology, and yes, there might be all this stuff that is put in place to safeguard the transmission of results and all the other things related to the election. But the fact that the possibility still exists is a bit, it just causes a bit of unease.
My final question to you really is around the headlines we're seeing regarding Facebook, especially coming out going, we're doing everything we can to ensure that Kenya gets a free and fair election. Funny that you didn't do it in America. Never mind. But I mean, we're seeing Google, and it's, to me, the self-interest as far as Facebook and Google is evident. They are aspiring tech giants who aren't content to be, in the case of Facebook, a social media company, in the case of Google, a search company. They're increasingly being fingered as undercover media businesses, who have somewhat monopolistic advantages over pretty much everyone else. And so I can see why it's good for them to come out in this regard. I have had conversations with purists who say, listen, maybe we all need to just man and woman up to the truth that the internet is inherently a double-edged sword. The democratization potential of the internet, stands to benefit humanity in amazing ways, but equally in perhaps undesirable, nefarious ways. And we don't need a Facebook, we don't need a Google trying to teach us how to police what is and isn't news. Well, what do you say to hardliners who make that assertion?
A lot of the discussion, a lot of the dialogue, especially after the 2013 election, tended to be very, there was a lot of hate speech on Facebook being posted by Kenyans. And to the point where people were saying, instead of now going to the streets and fighting and causing violence, we were doing it online. So for them to come out and say that they're not really complicit in the spread of this information, I think it's a bit misleading, because they're trying to now absolve themselves of that responsibility. Because they'll be like,
Look,
anything that's posted.
on one hand, yeah, and I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think you're right in that they can't claim to be that this isn't their problem. But I think there's some people who believe that. I mean, where do you draw the line? We might agree that that sort of behavior is egregious and should not be permitted or is socially unacceptable. But I mean, on some level, there are lines potentially crossed in sort of legislating moral behavior. Or do you not see that as a line we've crossed already, or as a line that's worth considering given what's at stake?
Well, okay, I think at some level we have to consider the fact that we've actually crossed that line, because we practically live online. Like, all our stuff is on the internet, and all these social networks, like, basically our information is their currency, so they can do whatever they want with it. And I think at some level, the fact that they're coming out to say that these are the things that we're putting in place, it's a noble initiative. I mean, it shows that at some level they understand that some of the blame for the way things have worked out is on them. And I think it's a really good starting point for the discussion going forward about, especially when it comes to net neutrality, like, are we willing to now give up some of our freedoms to some of these social networks, because they're going to be like looking at us in terms of we are the product that they're selling, and our privacy is what's at stake.
Yeah. And are we happy for them to decide what is acceptable within the scope of expressing our humanity on their platform?
Yeah, because I know for a fact that if the result tomorrow goes against some people's wishes, they will go online and they will complain. And that's a constitutionally protected right. Like, they have every right to go online and complain as much as they want about how the things didn't work out in their favor. And if they have evidence that things were manipulated against them, then they can go to the courts. So ultimately, I think I'll go back to my first point, which is these platforms are inherently neutral. And the fact that people are able to say whatever they want is part of the big appeal. So I would say on the whole that it's good that they're recognizing the role in the spread of some of these fake stories. And then the fact that they are also identifying, like, they're giving people ways to identify fake stories and all these other things. It's a good step, yeah.
I suppose the one thing that I often remind myself or remind other people who look to tech and for like grand solutions to the problems that ironically tech creates when we adopt it. For me, I think ultimately, if we're honest, it's people that are the problem. I mean, in the UK, for example, there's a trend towards splashing people with acid, you know what I mean? And now I believe Parliament in the UK is trying to decide whether or not to sort of outlaw the buying of acid for certain purposes, or to have it, registered. The thing is, if you can sort of make it hard to access acid for your drain, but people will figure out other things, and it almost feels like a whack-a-mole situation where ultimately these might be, I mean, it might just be symptoms of just where we're at as a society, which is a depressing way to think about it, but probably entirely pragmatic.
Yeah, I think so. Like, which is why I think the way social media is shut down, like the way it was shut down in the Gambia and in Uganda last year, it's really counterproductive, because you're not solving the problem that is making people get online to complain. Instead, you're just shutting off the means that they have to actually complain about the issues that they're facing. So on the whole, I think technology just lends itself easily to our lives in such a way that it becomes like really interlinked. And then as a result, you find that we go online more and more to express ourselves. And with time, that's where it becomes a main outlet for our frustrations. So by finding ways to just keep the people like subdued and placid and quiet,
or even just project the image of placidity or quietness or peace.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's going to explode eventually, and that's one reason why I think the internet is going to stay on, as far as Kenya is concerned.
They've probably figured that out,
because they know if they do shut it down, it's going to have.
They probably actually would rather know at this point who doesn't like them or who's unhappy or who's. It's probably. I feel like it's safer for all of us to kind of know who's like racist and sexist and unethical and immoral. I look, to me, I don't I don't garner any sense of comfort from knowing that the people who would otherwise be that way on the internet are somehow barred from being themselves, and it doesn't help me pretending that the world is somewhat nicer online than it is in real life, because I don't know how that aids society in any way. But I mean, that's just me.
I actually agree with you that you need to know where these people are and know what sort of things they're saying, because by acting like they don't exist or that they're somewhere else and not on whatever platform you're on, then you're denying it's an aspect of humanity that you're trying to deny.
And I think our role as sort of journalists or quasi-journalists in the space, commentators, whatever you want to call us, is to call out what we see as immoral or unethical or just not right or unprofessional for whatever reason. Sure, I mean, that's a role we ought to play, and perhaps to empower our citizenry to be that much more alert to dubious information or weaponized information, whatever you want to call it, that kind of thing. I think we probably should spend more time doing that and sort of trying to suppress the evil, as it were. And I say that carefully because we do need law, we do need the rule of law, but I am cognizant of how quickly it can turn into sort of legislating a whole bunch of areas in our lives that we might be better off sort of not legislating, not least, say, freedom of religion, for example, and things like that.
Yeah, because if you look at how technology has been deployed in this election, it has been fantastic, because you can literally send your ID number to a short code and it's going to give you all the details of where you're registered, which queue you're supposed to be in, and what the name of your polling station is, which constituency you're in, and all those other things. So by applying one little facet of technology, you're able to make life easier for a lot of people. And then ultimately, I think the bigger concern is how do we now apply all of these things going forward, because we can't just focus on this is the election and then this is where we're going to deploy all our technology, and after it's done, we're like, what do we do with it? So I think it should be a starting point for it's been applied in other government departments, but I think there's a lot of other applications that could be found for some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, Eric, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. We're averaging once a year at this stage. Maybe we can improve on that.
Yeah, we should.
But congratulations once again on your new role. Keep us all honest, and certainly keep us all up to date about what we ought to look out for. You obviously have eyes on what's trending in as far as tech interacting with how misinformation is either manufactured or peddled and that kind of thing. And if we can save any of our listeners any sort of pain and time and energy in having to grapple with these things by having you on the show or having you send us through some issues to grapple with, by all means, send that over.
Oh, definitely. PesaCheck is literally just one of a bunch of different initiatives by Code for Africa. So we always have lots of things happening within the tech space. And especially, I think with PesaCheck, the niche that we've chosen is public finance, but there's other different fact-checking initiatives that are going down, and there's a number of different tools that we use. So you can just have a look at our site, that's codeforafrica.org, and you'll be able to see, because a lot of it is geared towards civic tech, basically just engaging the public and finding ways for them to get informed and stay informed.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, man. That's it.
You're welcome.